Okay, so this is our last talk of this session, and it's Planning Under Uncertainty for Coordinating Infrastructural Maintenance by Joris Scharpff, Matthias Spahn, Leentje Volker, and Matthias de Weert. And Joris Scharpff is giving the talk.
Thank you. Well, that's pretty good pronunciation I've heard so far. I'm doing a talk on a combination of planning under uncertainty with also mechanism design, and we apply it to a real problem here. So I'd best go into a motivating example just to make clear what we're doing here. So consider, for instance, this road network over here. In this network, there is a road authority which is responsible for the quality of the network and the congestion, of course. So he wants to minimize the congestion and maximize quality. But on the other hand, there are contractors, third-party contractors, that are contracted to perform maintenance on this network. And you could also readily see that doing maintenance on a network, you have to either close some roads or at least block some lanes. So it causes additional congestion. As well as single agent planning here, there's also the multi-agent problem, because if we plan together, it could cause more hindrance to the network than we would have had would we plan separately. But also the other way around, it could cause less. Some examples, for instance, are, let's see, this one, Agent 1 plans at 880C, and Agent 2 plans a 92B at the same time. So this entire western area of this road network would probably suffer a lot from these two activities being at the same time, right? So, but on the other hand, we could have sort of serial roads in this case, and if we decide to do this work joint at the same time, then we would have only had to block this road once. So it's not easy to see in what cases we can and cannot plan together. So this needs some coordination. So the goal of our research or of our method is to coordinate this planning on this network in the sense that we want to maximize quality and minimize congestion, preferably at a minimal cost also. But this is not trivial. For one, these goals do not align. So I'm a road authority. I'm bothered with the network, right? So I want high quality and I want low congestion. Cost is also an issue, but it's not my main concern maybe. But these contractors, well, they just do a job, right? So they do this maintenance to make money. And of course they have some specifications about quality level and congestion, but yeah, they don't really care. They want to make as much money as they can, right? So, but also a problem here is that execution is inherently uncertain. Maintenance often takes more time than planned for at first sight. So then also we have this problem that these contractors are companies. So they have vital business information. These costs they have for doing work, like how many people they would want to put on the job or resources, or these are all private to them. And they don't want to share all these stuff with the other contractors because it's vital for their business strategies. So these are private. That makes it hard. And as a consequence, if we don't know about private information, they might just report anything about their costs so that their revenue or the price they will get for doing a job is really high and they can make as much money as possible. So how do we tackle this problem now? Well, more or less through legislation. So this road authority now sort of like specifies weekends or time slots in which these contractors can work. So they assign sort of weekends to all these contractors. But this has several drawbacks. For one, the road authority designs the plan, so any delay is inherently his fault, and it takes all the risk. Also, the road authority needs to know everything about every possible maintenance operation, its costs or its effects. So it requires a lot of in-house experts, while these companies also have these experts. So why bother having them as well? And last point is that it's not performance-based. So a lot of contracts nowadays are performance-based, which simply says that if you do a good job, you get money. If you do an even better job, you get more money. And this is something we would like. We would like the contractor to attain the highest quality levels, of course. So what we propose to do in our work is we coordinate this maintenance planning through payments, through implicit payments, so that for a contractor it becomes most profitable to also do what is most profitable in a global sense, or for the road authority. So simply put, this is just a trivial way of stating this, but you have service agents in the first place, so they're only optimizing their profit, which is the sum of revenue minus the sum of their cost. And we want to achieve or introduce payments, in this case Q, which is for quality, and L, which states latency or congestion costs. And with these additional payments or penalties, we would like to see that they plan their work in a globally favorable way. Right? So what we want to do is, given this utility defined here in equation 2, we want to optimize this sum of utilities. So this is sort of a social welfare we want to optimize. Arguably, you could have other criteria, but now we're just going for the sum of contractor utility. So this is difficult because of some things I stated before, but just to reiterate their importance, we cannot optimize this sum without knowing exactly what these private costs are. So we need to have some way to get this information. Also, they can lie, of which I will provide an example in the next couple of slides, why this is bad. Uncertainty, so we can actually optimize this, but if something happens like a delay, we need to adjust for this. And, of course, these congestion payments, which was the motivating example at the start, this throughput or congestion payment, depends on what contractors jointly choose to do. For instance, here's an example, 2 contractors on the road network. Well, should we do this work concurrently, sequential? If we do it concurrently, how should we distribute the traffic payments? So to what part is, or what responsibility has agent 1 here, and how much is agent 2 responsible for? And what would we do with delays, failures? How could we attribute these to agents? So these are typical problems that you're facing when you're dealing with throughput payments. And it makes agents dependent on a network level. So the solution we applied here is a combination of a dynamic Factory-Clark Groves mechanism, which is a dynamic mechanism. I'll go into that in a couple next slides. And we combined it with planning under uncertainty techniques. So the dynamic VCG mechanism is a sort of used to elicit these costs. So we need to know these private costs. And then if we know these private costs, we can optimize. So we can find a policy, not a plan, but a policy that takes into account these uncertainties, and we can coordinate the maintenance. However, to guarantee truthfulness, which is an important property of a mechanism, we need to find optimal policies here, which is, of course, not trivial. And we have been able to solve some realistic instances through smart encoding, which I will briefly discuss also. So mechanism design, not everybody is familiar with mechanism design, so I just thought to give a short introduction. So basically what you do in game theory is you model the agents here as players, and they have a sort of valuation function, and they want to optimize this function. So what mechanism design does is a sort of inverse game theory. We define payments such that these rational agents choose maximizing outcomes, but those are exactly now the ones that are favorable from a global perspective. So through these payments, you can steer them towards more globally favorable optima. So what we want to do here is optimize this sum of utility, but we also have some typical other properties that we want to desire, or that we desire from a mechanism. So for instance, individual rationality is one, which states simply that it's always at least non-negative profit if agents join this, which is important because if I'm a company, I wouldn't want to be joining a procedure that could cause me to make a loss, right? So secondly, which is I think the most important one here, is incentive compatibility, which says that given this mechanism payments, it's always the best action for agents to report truthfully. Or in other words, they state their private costs truthfully so we can optimize this problem. And finally, which also a nice property to have, especially when this is to be applied from some public institution, is weekly budget balance, which says there's no external funding required for this mechanism. So you have payments, but it's not that you need additional money to enforce these payments. So a quick example, I'll go through this quickly because it could take up a lot of time if I'm doing this to a large, extensively. So there are two agents here and two time steps, right? Agent 1 has cost function C1, which says at time 1 I pay 2, and at time 2 I pay 8. Agent 2 has this sort of same cost function, which says 3 and 10. And additionally, if they both plan their work at the same time, you get a congestion payment of 5 per agent, right? So when there's no mechanism and everybody is truthful, the outcome will be this one. Because in this case, the total cost is only 11. And note that if they would choose their cheapest outcome, both of them, so C1 would choose the first time slot and C2 as well, or agent 2 as well, then yeah, the total cost would be 5, but you have these latency costs which make it more expensive. So, but now in this case, agent 1 has an incentive to lie about his cost function. For instance, consider that he would report a different cost function, 2 and 20 instead of 2 and 8. Now the system has these reports and optimizes over these cost functions, and it will get to this outcome, which is, given these reports, cheaper for the overall system. So indeed, agent 1's cost will decrease from 8 to 7, so he's better off. But the total outcome is worse. So we want to prevent this, and also agent 2 here suffers. So we want to prevent this. So what we basically do, this is a static setting, not a dynamic setting, but basically the principle is the same. What we want to do is we introduce a payment, or VCG, Fickler-Groves payment, that exactly charges the harm an agent causes to others. So let's say there's a payment T, which is defined as the valuation of all others over the given reports, minus the valuation of all others in an outcome that they could have achieved without my presence. So then, in the previous example, let's say that agent 1 is lying again, although we would get the same outcome, but the valuations here, or his utility, is now minus 12, and the utility of player 2 is minus 13. And would he have been truthful, we would have obtained these utilities. I would refer to the paper for more details, because this could take up a lot of time, but you get the point probably that using these payments, it is better for them to be truthful, because now when he lies, it costs him more than he would have paid when it was truthful, right? So onto the dynamic setting, which is more or less a repeated mechanism, taking into account new information that could arrive over time. So the dynamic Fickler-Groves mechanism is it's a simple extension of the static VCG mechanism, but now instead of charging the harm they cause to others, we charge the expected harm over the future outcomes. So this is a beautiful mechanism because it satisfies all the required properties, but we need the optimal policy, which is hard. So a few quick notes on finding this optimal policy then. We can do this, we can model this as an MDP. And we could combine all these single-agent MDPs into one large multi-agent MDP, which we can solve as one MDP to find an optimal policy. But the thing is, if we just simply combine all these single-agent MDPs, like using the procedure stated below, we get both an exponential state space as well as an exponential action state space. And this is a problem because typical MDP solvers are used to exponential state space, but they're not geared towards exponential action states. So, and in our problem, the basic enumeration takes up an exponential action set space, which is exponential in the number of players here. So we could generate all these combinations, and that would also work, but it's exponential. So we're going to do something smarter here. So the basic idea is to split up instead of choosing a joint activity all at once, we first select an activity for each of these individual agents and then use one joint execution step, like this. So first, agent A decides what activity he's planning on doing, agent B, agent C, and then it's executed. But note that these are MDP actions, all within one time step of the original problem. So you can go do even better. I would leave this to the paper in view of time, but this is even more compact. So what we did, we used these encodings and we tried some real-world scenarios and experimented on them just to see how feasible this combination of mechanism design and planning is. And we tested our approach using Spot Solver as an internal MDP solver. So we compared our work in terms of reward against other approaches like the best response planning and individual planning, and did this for 2 scenarios. So these scenarios are actually derived from domain analysis and interviews with experts, so it's not like we just made something up, it's actual practical problems. The one is unit time activities with failures, and the second is harder, has activities with non-unit durations and non-unit delay times. Planning, well, this is probably known to most of you. We do a decentralized approach here. You can also do individual, but then you cannot account for network payments. And in the middle ground is best response, which is sort of iteratively improving on the individual planning. So some quick results. We compared our method against best response and individual planning, and you can see that our method, given levels of uncertainty, performs best cost-wise. We optimize the sum of utilities with centralized planning. On the other hand, the runtime is, you can see the log scales here. So even for a sort of simple, this is scenario 1, unit time activities, we already are into the thousands of seconds. But you can see here that activity chain encoding, the last one that I quickly skipped, performs best and allowed us to solve for even 5 players, which the other didn't within this time limit. So some study on parameters, because this is the first time that actually some combination of mechanism design and planning on uncertainty was done, so we don't know exactly what causes the complexity here. Activity set size doesn't really matter here, because it's unit time actions. You can pick any of these actions and it doesn't really matter. And the period length, well, because the quality level gets at a certain point at which no activity has to be done, more or less it decreases over time. Well, the increase drops. So finally then a small comment on the portfolio planning, which is the second scenario, which has longer tasks and we need to do all of them. This is quite more complex. This is only a single player response. So it's sort of the best response to other plans. And you can see already for 3 activities and 3 roads, which is E, we're in millions of seconds. So to conclude, this is a new approach of a combination of mechanism design with stochastic planning to coordinate activities on a network level in a private value setting, which is very important to note here. So through some smart encoding, you can reduce action set space complexity, and you're still able to, well, solve for smaller real-world instances. And also you have to note that these are real-world instances. We actually also do experiments with a serious game with practitioners on these same instances. So some open challenges. First of all, scalability. The results showed you it's not scalable at all at the moment. And there's inherently a multi-objective problem here: cost, quality, and traffic or congestion time. So we would like to tackle them separately instead of combining them into one monetary value. Currently, we're working on planning or modeling this as an RDDL. I'm working into approximation techniques, but it's not as straightforward because of the mechanism design properties you want to guarantee. And we're building a serious game that implements all this as a game to test with practitioners. And with this, I'd like to conclude. Thank you very much.